You guys get to see the messy half of the home studio because all my super cool sound foam is, behind you. Hi, my name is Bryson Bogus, and for those of you who are unfamiliar with me, I am a voice actor based out of Houston, Texas. I've done quite a bit of work for Sentai Filmworks as well as Funimation, and I've also done the odd indie project online here or there for the past 10 years or so. Just a quick side note before we begin, I did notice while editing this video, I was recording my webcam alongside my microphone both through OBS, and I think the way that it was processing the audio in addition to the video sort of messed up something somewhere, so just keep that in mind. I probably should have recorded the audio separate through something like Audition or Audacity, but we here. Early on, when I first decided that I wanted to be a voice actor, I focused pretty heavily on making sure that I was able to do broadcast-ready audio from my home. So I've pretty much had some form of home recording setup since as early as 2010, 2011. Those early years I was 14 and I didn't really know what I was doing, so... But I've learned quite a bit just from audio engineer friends and other voice actors as well as to what makes a really good home recording space. And now due to all the quarantining and the stay-at-home orders because of the outbreak, a lot of people are having to do a lot of voice work from home, but they're not entirely sure how best to set up their home for recording quality audio. So I figured I'd show you guys what my home studio setup looks like just so that you can have an idea of what you can do best to fit your space. And notice I'm talking about the space more so than the microphone that I'm using. I am using a Shure KSM32, which is a $500 microphone, but you do not need something that expensive to start working on narration or animation or video games, and I can get into some recommendations at the end of the video. So I use my walk-in closet at my apartment, and yes, that is an apartment, so I do rent, which means I can't do a whole lot of modifications to the walls and stuff like that. So if you own your house or you live with your parents and they're okay with you putting holes in the wall to run cords through, then you might have the capability to get a better space than I have. So over on this end of my closet, I have most of my acoustic foam set up because this is sort of where I live mostly, and it's where all my microphones are, and it tends to be the direction in which I usually speak the most. So I'm trying to mitigate as much back reflections as I possibly can on this half of the room. I do have my desk with my computer monitors, my mouse and keyboard, and my MIDI controller, and all this other stuff because I also do streams on Twitch. Follow me on there at twitch.tv/BogusBryson, please. But you'll notice my computers are not in here. They are actually right outside my closet, and I have a lot of really long cables running along my feet right here. Management is a bit terrible, but I still gotta sort that out because this is actually a pretty recent update to my home studio in an effort to make it even better for remote recording. And then on this half of the room, it's clothes. It's clothes, cloth, blankets. Any cloth material is gonna be really good at absorbing sound. Just make sure that you have it nice and evenly spread so that you don't have too many gaps of bare wall showing. And then also, you can't see this in the camera, but right above my head is another makeshift panel to try and mitigate some of the reflections coming from the ceiling. And I feel that's probably where my specific space is the weakest right now. It's a really high ceiling for a closet, so that leaves a lot of dead space up in the upper area. I don't currently have a way to mount my panels up on the ceiling itself, so I sort of did this as really a makeshift sort of... Maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't. Audio engineers will probably know better than me. And then one of the things that I plan on doing next to upgrade this even further is getting something like a PVC frame and then hanging like moving blankets or something right behind me for when I'm recording, just because that deadens a lot of the reflections from behind me. Because this is a big closet, as you can tell, that makes for a really open space, which for music recording is usually pretty good. But for voiceover, you want it to be as isolated as possible a lot of the time. And I'll get into that here in a second about the different types of voiceover where isolation versus a little bit more reflection is somewhat okay and sometimes even wanted. Editing Bryson here, just hopping in because recording Bryson was a dum-dum and forgot to clarify what he meant by this. Basically, for some projects, they actually do like a little bit of a live sound to it as opposed to a completely dead one, because sometimes if you have a completely dead sound, it does tend to sound like a person reading inside of a vocal booth as opposed to a character living and breathing inside of a world. But I digress, back to the recorded Bryson. But yeah, that's sort of the physical setup that I have right now. And what else was I gonna say? Microphones. Like I said, you don't need a $500 KSM32 or a $1,000 TLM103. Most microphones that you're going to have, or probably already have, is going to do just fine, especially in the current climate that we're in, where it's probably not best for you to hop in your car and drive to the nearest Guitar Center and pick up some germs on your way to get that latest hot new Rode NT1A. I would advise, though, that you do get a microphone that uses XLR input, not a USB microphone. I have heard about some professionals booking voiceover work using USB microphones like the Blue Yeti or something equivalent to that, but in a lot of those cases, that USB microphone was only used for the audition process and not the final audio. But the people that are booking that kind of work with that kind of microphone usually know how to use it properly, and even so, a lot of audio engineers are going to want a raw recording without any sort of touch-ups by you, and something like a Blue Yeti or a USB microphone is going to have a built-in preamp that causes self-noise, which puts a lot of extra work on the audio engineer's end that they're not looking to get into. And so they might just decide to go with somebody who they don't have to do so much processing on to be able to even use their recording in the first place. So, what kind of mics do I recommend? The AT2020 is by far the most popularly recommended XLR microphone. I've also heard really good things about the Samson CO1. Rode NT1A is also another popular one, and I also mentioned it in my Guitar Center joke earlier, if you'll remember. And yeah, those are all microphones that fall somewhat within the $100 to $200 range. What you're going to want in addition to an XLR microphone is a USB audio interface. A really popular one is the Scarlett Solo or the Scarlett 2i2. The difference between the two being the Scarlett Solo has one input and the Scarlett 2i2 has two inputs. For voiceover, you really only need one input, and I don't have a Scarlett, so I don't know if the preamps are any different between a Solo or a 2i2, so somebody who does have both or knows more about those, they can probably tell you which one is better in terms of preamps, if they're even any different at all. But I have two interfaces. One of the interfaces that I have is the Behringer UMC 202 HD, and it's only about 50, 60 bucks last I checked. It's pretty cheap for a pretty decent USB interface, and the preamps aren't bad as far as I can tell. And the one that I'm using right now to record this video is my second one, which is technically more of a mixer than an interface, but I use the Yamaha MG10XU, which has the option to connect to your computer via USB and be used as an interface as well. The preamps on it so far I haven't had any issue with, but I do know that one of the things that I need to look into getting to improve my current setup is a dedicated preamp. So a dedicated preamp is basically a box, and its entire job is to just supply gain and phantom power to your microphone. Side note, I just reminded myself that phantom power is a thing. Most condenser microphones, XLR, are going to require something called phantom power, which is a 48 volt just power source from your interface. Make sure the one that you go with does have it. Back on track. Usually the more expensive dedicated preamps are going to be better at supplying gain to the microphone with as little preamp noise as possible, but for the purposes of this video and to show you that you really can just work with what you have is good. Usually whatever preamps on your interface, or mixer in my case, is good enough for what you're going to need as just a talent. Usually all that other stuff is what you'll find more at like a full production studio or something like that. And up to this point, I have had some music playing under my voice to just sort of make the video better, but here's how this particular microphone sounds in my space without any sort of music or sound effects coloring it or hiding any sort of noise. You'll notice that when I talk a little bit louder, and I'm kind of talking a bit more projected than I normally would into this microphone at this current level, just because I want to show you this particular microphone is a little bit more sensitive to something like reflections, like I mentioned earlier. Reflections are when your voice basically hits a wall and bounces back and the microphone picks that up. Based on feedback from an audio engineer friend of mine, a lot of the reflections that I'm experiencing probably are coming from this sort of area over here that I need to work a little bit more on deadening. But I will say the amount of reflection in this particular recording is usually something that is easily covered up with music and sound effects in stuff like video games or animation or anime. Case in point.
I say, let me ask you something. What do I look like to you, eh? A bag of focaccia?
Hey man, did you get that book my mom ordered for me? I can wait another couple days if I need to. I just figured I'd ask. But for stuff like narration or commercials or something like that, a lot of clients probably prefer that your voice sound as dead as possible. And some production companies and clients kind of prefer a little bit of a reflection in the sound, but a lot of the studios that I've personally worked for commercials and even anime, tend to have at least some reflection in the signal. Where you're going to want the audio to be pretty much as dead as possible is when you get into something like audiobooks, narration, and even some commercials, in which case I bust out my big boy. So this is the Shure SM7B, and this is what's called a dynamic microphone. The KSM32 is what is called a condenser microphone, which is a little bit more sensitive to noise in the room. Dynamic microphones like the SM7B or the SM58 stage microphone. I have a lot of Shure microphones. I even have the SM57. Dynamic microphones are better at rejecting noise that's not directly in front of it. Quick side note regarding dynamic microphones, a lot of dynamic microphones usually require a lot more gain than a standard condenser microphone. So for something like the 7B or RE20 or even the SM58 or 57, it's usually recommended that you also have something called a cloud lifter or a Triton Fed head, which basically gives it 20 dB of noiseless gain on top of whatever your interface or preamp is giving you for these microphones. So that makes dynamic microphones really popular for stuff like live performances, radio, broadcast, and a lot of commercials are recorded on stuff like either the SM7B or the RE20. So yeah, if I need that more isolated, like in an audiobook, then this is the microphone I would probably go with. Audio engineers, you know better than me. I'm just an actor. I'm not an engineer in any way. So if anything that I'm saying sounds a little off, be sure to put that in the comments below and let people know, because I feel like this time more than ever, it's really important for talent and audio engineers to start interacting and letting each other know, hey, this sounds great. Hey, maybe this could be better. Because for the time being, it seems like working from home and recording voiceover from home is going to start becoming more and more of a thing as technology improves and as we are stuck at home with no other choice, honestly. And I guess that's sort of the point of this video is, as I mentioned on Twitter and at the beginning of this video, the space that you're recording in is way more important than the microphone you're using. I'm sure if somebody had a much better setup than I have right now, using an AT2020, they could probably get a better sounding signal than what I did in this video alone. I know that I have improvements that I need to make for this particular space, and I am currently in the process of doing that. I just wanted to get this video out there as soon as I could so that you guys know and don't stress too much about, oh, I need 50,000 acoustic panels to fill the entire wall-to-wall space. I need to get this $1,000 microphone, otherwise people aren't going to use me for things. Don't stress about that too much. Just use what you have, throw up some blankets, some clothes. If you don't have very many acoustic panels, find a closet where you can stand comfortably and read a script off of your phone or an iPad or something like that. If you don't have a full desktop setup like I do, just make sure that if you're recording on something like a laptop or a desktop, make sure that it's in a separate space from where you're recording, because your microphone will pick up computer fans and stuff like that. Anyway, I don't really know how to end this video. Just, I guess, share it around to any voice talent that you think would benefit from this video, or just share it around so that people aren't stressing so much about it. I've seen a couple of friends of mine who have been doing anime for a while that have been stressing about their home recording setup because of the current quarantine and outbreak and everything like that. And I sort of just wanted to make this to sort of quell any worries or anything like that, and just encourage you guys to just start recording. Find an engineer that you've worked with or a friend who is an engineer and say, hey, how does this sound? What do you think I could do to improve the space, etc. I'm encouraging communication because that's sorely lacking in this sort of isolation culture we've had the past few weeks. Have a great day. I hope that you guys are staying healthy and safe. And yeah, that's the video. How do you end videos? One last thing before you go, I did want to go ahead and recommend a couple of videos for getting set up at home. One of them is by Booth Junkie, a great channel for home voiceover tips and tricks. And the other is the My Catalog video by Soul Brother Number 3. He's got a lot of great videos specifically about becoming an online voice actor, but I always recommend this particular video for anybody asking me about microphones or equipment. So yeah, share this around if you feel like it. Leave a comment if you think that there was anything that I missed and you would like to bring attention to. And hope you have a good day. Stay safe. Wash your hands.